Seventh Son of a Seventh Son is Iron Maiden's seventh album, and is a monumental Iron Maiden album. One of their most critically acclaimed album, and in my opinion, this is very well deserved. Now let's just talk a bit about the history before we talk about the actual music. Bruce Dickinson, completely back into the game. Absolutely amazing. After Somewhere in Time, where he was, burnt out from the World Slavery Tour, he wasn't doing things that Iron Maiden were doing in the 80s, and he's kind of being a bit not very forward-thinking and just kind of messing around, to be honest, but he completely got back into the game. This is the last time for a while that he was really contributing a lot of great music to the band, and yeah, Bruce's performance too, though not quite as good as Power Slave and Peace of Mind maybe too, maybe those two are kind of a tie, are the best recorded performances of Bruce Dickinson, and will always be the best recorded performances of Bruce Dickinson. But he still is very good performance on this album, and he uses, his voice is more stylized, he uses a lot of cool kind of vocal techniques that I'll talk about when I get to the specific songs, but yeah, his vocal performance is still very good. And obviously everyone else is performing great too. Again, this is not Power Slave performing kind of a level, but the band was really tight at this point. This is the last time they were really tight, a really solid unit of absolutely amazing musicians. Again, this is the classic lineup, so they're all very talented. We know that. It's just about whether they're kind of working together well, usually. And yeah, so the writing performances from everyone is great. I'm not sure if everyone contributes, but the people that do contribute are definitely notable. There are basically no bad tracks on this album, to be honest, but we'll get there when we talk about the track listing. Now, getting more to the actual style of the music, this has a lot of really interesting elements that I could get really in-depth with, but I'll try to kind of summarize it as I do in my reviews. The power metal element is a very, very notable element from this album, and this album kind of does a thing where it takes some elements of already existing power metal, like Keeper of the Seven Keys, I believe, by Halloween, I believe that's what it's called. And yeah, there was already some power metal around, but this album, obviously it's by Iron Maiden, which is already ridiculously popular. They're already, how do I explain this, kind of inspiring more power metal bands to come around, and I do quite enjoy power metal, but this also shows what a growth Iron Maiden have had. They're not just making the same music over and over again like some bands. In the kind of early years they were kind of inspiring things like thrash and really taking the kind of punky element of it, but now they're just completely making everything way bigger, and everything's just a way bigger sound. Kind of like how it was on Somewhere in Time, but even more of that, even more kind of a mature, huge sound. Obviously, the kind of fantasy-oriented lyrics obviously contributes to the power metal thing. The fantasy kind of lyrics is a common trait with power metal. And another thing is the progressive element, which I absolutely love. I'm not kind of a progressive expert, so I can't exactly point out specific things, but it's definitely in there. But you really have to listen in close for them because they're not too overwhelming. And I've listened to quite a bit of progressive metal, and a lot of it kind of is a little bit overwhelming for me, anyway. But I'm sure people will have different opinions about that. But I love the progressive element. It's not too overbearing, but you really do have to listen in for this, This is kind of a thing with the whole album. You can't just kind of put it on and listen to it and like it, You really have to listen in close, which is something that would again happen a couple of albums down the line with the X Factor. And another thing I want to mention is just the production. The production is absolutely amazing. Obviously, Martin Birch is getting a better producer, and he's absolutely amazing at creating this huge sound that's appropriate for the content. This feels on such a vast scale, and it's overall, the sound is just so huge and just right for what Iron Maiden were doing at the time. Obviously, the keyboard synths, which are changing from Somewhere in Time, which was guitar synths, feels more mature, feels more evolved, Feels like on the last album they were just kind of playing around with them, but now they're getting really serious with taking different elements, taking the synth element, taking using cool studio effects, using cool intros, just doing different things and making it really, really work. Just makes this album one of Iron Maiden's greatest, if not their greatest. I really don't want to go there of what's Iron Maiden's best album at this point. But yeah, every part of this album, and it feels like they're evolving. They're not just doing the same thing over and over again with Iron Maiden to Power Slave, Seventh Son. They're all stylistically show the band's evolution, and shows that they're not just going to rehash the same thing over and over again, even though it was popular, you know. Now, the artwork is absolutely brilliant. I really don't want to describe it. Just go look at it. It's amazing. I guess that's kind of lazy on my part, but seriously, you really just have to kind of look at it and really appreciate it, kind of like that. So, yeah, overall, I could even go longer about certain elements and certain styles and structure and things like that, but anyway, this is more sort of a summary of the history in the band and the album. So, the first track is Moonchild, and Moonchild has a really famous intro, kind of 7 Deadly Sins, 7 Ways to Win. And yeah, it's a great intro, really sets this really cool vibe for the rest of the song, which is just really fast, really high energy, and is one of the Iron Maiden greats for openers at least, and I really like it. Catchy chorus, and great riff, and great intro, all that kind of stuff. Now this goes into Infinite Dreams, which kind of slows it down a little bit, which I really like. I generally am not a fan of albums that are always at the same tempo, whether that would be fast or slow. I like albums that kind of mix it up a bit. And this is, I believe, Bruce Dickinson and Adrian Smith, and the writing sort of partnership between Bruce Dickinson and Adrian Smith is quite famous. Especially with Bruce Dickinson's solo material too, which I may review someday. But yeah, it slows it down, and some great guitar lines, some really cool lyrics kind of about the Seventh Son having dreams and, you know, weird stuff happening to the Seventh Son, basically. I don't want to talk too much about the actual concept. I mainly am going to focus on the music, but I'm going to talk about the concept a little bit, because you really can't talk about this album without at least mentioning the concept. And this goes into Can I Play With Madness, and this is, I believe, the first single, and it's a really good song, really catchy. It manages to do the thing that really good concept albums that can do, is be relevant to the concept, but also work as a single, as its own entity. And this song and the next song are really great at doing that. Now, in particular, has great vocals, great harmony, all the kind of good main stuff. It's really pretty fast too, and they play this song pretty fast live too. And the next song, Evil That Men Do, and this is one of my favorites on the album, has some really good lyrics, and it's kind of about Seventh Son, you know, doing all this evil stuff, you know, like all men, you know, do evil stuff and things like that. But yeah, this is really great guitar line, and a great solo too. I really like the Evil That Men Do. Some pretty good melodic verses as well. I really like that. And then we move on to the epic Seventh Son of a Seventh Son. Now, before I actually get into it, I want to mention that this is kind of the thing that I was talking about before of this album that's, as a concept album, is not particularly tight. It's not as tight as the music is. And what I mean is, I'm not really sure where this song, in terms of narrative structure, belongs, you know? It seems probably would make more sense to take place after Moonchild, just after the Seventh Son is born, but I'm really not too sure about it, because I guess you could kind of see it as just a summary of everything about the Seventh Son, but this song kind of comes off as weak in terms of the concept, but it's still, nonetheless, has some really cool lyrics about the Seventh Son, you know, and it's really great song. Now, actually getting into the music, it's amazing. This is a great epic. Steve Harris epics are great for kind of symbolizing what's brilliant about the album, you know, just beautiful writing, all the effects are there. Almost like in the beginning, it almost seems like there's kind of a choir, and I don't know if there is, but it kind of seems like there's a choir to kind of sing it, which really amps up the epic feel. Obviously, it's an epic, has to be epic, you know. I need a breath. But yeah, the lyrics are absolutely brilliant, and one thing I will say is the kind of instrumental sections are a little bit too long, but I can just sit there and listen to just the music without lyrics all day with this album, because the instrumentally it's so complex and so brilliant that I just love it so much. And this song is it's not too long, that is just kind of ridiculous, but it's also a good amount of time to appreciate all the elements of it. And yeah, bass is great, and Bruce's performance is absolutely brilliant as well. Really atmospheric, really kind of... I'm not sure if it's this song in particular, but there's a couple tracks on this album where he uses this thing. It's like a really raspy kind of a voice, and he would do this way too much on the next two albums, but on this album, he used it when it was necessary and was absolutely beautiful. And the next track is The Prophecy, which is probably the weakest on the album, and the least people talk about this song, and mainly because there's nothing really that special. I mean, it's not that bad, it's not too long, but for the strength of the rest of the album, it does kind of feel like a filler. However, it does have an acoustic ending, which I really like, and it just goes to show that even on the weaker tracks, Iron Maiden spent a lot of time making sure that they weren't just kind of writing fillers really quickly and saying, okay, that'll go on the album, let's continue to something that's better. You know, they spent a lot of time on every individual track, making sure that it doesn't come off as too weak. You know, if it's a great album, but there's just one song in the middle that kind of is really bad, it sticks out like a sore thumb, but this doesn't happen, it just kind of breezes through it. And then we move on to the second to last track, which is The Clarivoyant. The Clarivoyant is an absolutely brilliant song. I absolutely love this song. It has a bass intro, which is quite notable. They don't do this very much. You don't see a lot of Iron Maiden songs that have just bass intro, but it's actually pretty good. And when Bruce's voice comes in with the bass, it's really good, really kind of atmospheric, and really dark, kind of a haunting vibe. And, you know, great riff, great lyrics, obviously, about the seventh son possessing the powers of a clairvoyant. And, yeah, good lyrics too. This whole album, great lyrics, to be honest. And, yeah, it's... Another interesting aspect of it is about the aspect of, could the seventh son of a seventh son foresee his own death? And I believe this is one of the things that actually inspired Steve to make a concept album in the first place. There was Clarivoyant in Britain at the time, and basically Steve wondered whether she could foresee her own death, and this kind of inspired him to make an album about seventh son and seventh son. Yeah, so quite good. And then this was on the last track, Only the Good Die Young, and to be honest, I'm not the biggest fan of this track. I think they could have had one of the stronger tracks to end it. I think that would have been better. But it's not a bad song, you know. It just kind of, you know, weak chorus, nothing that particularly memorable. So yeah, it's not, doesn't particularly stand out. But obviously the famous ending where you have the same thing, the same lines of dialogue repeated from the beginning of Moonchild to the end of Only the Good Die Young. And I never really knew what this meant, but I watched a review and it explained that it's kind of symbolizing that when the seventh son of a seventh son dies, the next born seventh son of a seventh son will have the same thing, and the whole cycle starts again, which I think is absolutely brilliant, which shows Iron Maiden's attention to detail. You know, they weren't just kind of skimping on things and making this feel a lot more full and tight, even though I've talked about some of the conceptual sides of this album that aren't quite as tight. And that concludes the track list. Now, Iron Maiden's Seventh Son of a Seventh Son is a monumental album and one of their landmark albums because it's so brilliant in almost every way. And it's just such an appreciation for what they did, you know. They changed things up. They didn't just write kind of standard, really good heavy metal music like they were on Peace of Mind and Power Slave, which I love to death. But those kind of albums, they were just taking advantage of the fact that they were at such a creative high and could write such good music in such a short period of time. But with this album, they took a little bit more time. They got in there, used some really cool effects, used some really cool intros, and things that you can only do in studios, you know? And I really appreciate it. It really came together, and it sounds really mature, whereas on Somewhere in Time, some of the kind of effects aspects can seem a little bit primary, whereas this, they're just so much more developed, you know? And almost every aspect of this album is really tight-knit and just really, really good, except for one, and that is the concept. Now, my main problem is because I don't think Iron Maiden knew fully what kind of a concept album they wanted to go for. I think it would have been better if they either did a full narrative structure where the seventh son of a seventh son, it's a complete story of his life, and all the lyrics merged together beautifully. Or they could have went the other direction, where each song is a particular aspect about the seventh son of a seventh son, and there's no narrative structure. And even Bruce Dickinson admitted that the concept wasn't done fully. And for me, if you're only going to do one concept album, do it right. Make it absolutely perfect in either a narrative structure or no narrative structure. I'm not saying you have to have a narrative structure, but if you're not going to have a narrative structure, make it good. And so yeah, but that I can definitely overlook. Just the fact that they did a concept album is, you know, great, because concept albums weren't particularly popular at this time, you know, they were kind of frowned upon by a lot of kind of mainstream music listeners. But anyway, this album is absolutely brilliant, one of the best albums that they would ever do, and because of that, I'm going to give it a 9.5 out of 10. Later.